Welcome once again to the High Performance Human Podcast. It's your man Andy here, and I am honored to be joined by someone who is widely regarded as one of the authorities in the land of public speaking. Now, public speaking is something that I think is second to death in terms of the things that people fear. And John Yeo is an absolute guru in this space. Over 20 years in the professional speaking and the coaching of the craft of professional speaking. 20 years in this gig, and he's also the licensee of TEDx in Melbourne, as well as the head of curation for it. So he's heavily involved in making sure that brings quality every time it shows up. He's been in the Professional Speakers Association for a heck of a long time, taking up presidency roles, and he really does take the leadership position that he's found himself in very, very seriously. Aside from anything else, he's one of the most articulate gentlemen that I've ever had the fortune of meeting. He has an IT background, so he's not just a hat rack. And he's genuinely one of the nicest, most approachable people that holds a position and a stature of this sort of nature that I've come across in a long, long time. So, John, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the High Performance Human podcast. How are you?
Hey Andy, thank you. That's very kind of you.
Oh, look, the pleasure's all mine, man. I've been so excited for this one because ever since I met you at a Professional Speakers Association event where and actually the only reason why I went to it is because you were the keynote for it. And the thing that really struck me, I've got really taken back by the fact that there are lots of people that are in positions of authority or austerity that some of them go for that sort of thing, but you clearly have just naturally progressed into this role where lots and lots of people look up to you in the world of public speaking. And even with that, and it's obvious that that's the case, the level of humility and what's the word? Compassion that you tend to communicate and collaborate with and whatnot is it's up there with the best. It's up there with the most. And I say humility not in a bad way. I say humility in that it's like you know that you are that good, so therefore you don't have to keep proving it. You just help other people. I've been a fan. I've been a fanboy, I will say, for ever since then. And I'm delighted that you're coming onto this show because there's a lot of people that are they feel that they've got more to give the world, but they really, really struggle to be able to be heard in that world. And this is something that I'm really looking forward to unpacking with you. Before we crack on, though, John, if you could please let our listeners know who you are and your little elevator spiel that got you up to this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were pretty comprehensive there. I think if I had to summarize aspects of that was really throughout my career, how do we help people understand the difference between people knowing what you do and valuing what you do? And I
Mm.
think, with a whole bunch of noise, social media and email and sensationalist headlines, there's a lot of people getting attention. The ability to capture and keep someone's attention in a meaningful way, I think is a hallmark of a great communicator. And so it's really how do we build the trust, rapport, and relationships with the people around us that support us in what we do and
Mhm.
arguably allow us to thrive in a mutually beneficial way. And I guess when you're referring to the humility, I'm really talking about how that synergy really comes together.
I love that. I love that. One thing that does interest me with what you just said there, is the difference between people hearing and people valuing,
Yeah.
and people seeing and people valuing. It's a very, very interesting step that very few people take. And so I'm really keen on unpacking that. That's going to be a fascinating part of the conversation. What made you? So you came from IT into
Yes.
public speaking. that's almost going from one end of the scale to the other in many stereotypical respects. So
Yeah.
what made you take the leap?
It was somewhat a circumstantial transition. So IT, sort of mid to late 90s. And for those who are old enough to remember, there was something called the Millennium Bug or the Y2K bug.
Hmm.
And one of my, I guess, responsibilities was convincing someone that was actually a thing.
Okay.
And as a relatively new graduate out of the IT world, getting the attention of the CEO, because there's no CFO, sorry, CTO or CIO back
Mm.
then. Getting the attention of the CEO was hard work. And one of the things I got good at is getting attention as he walked past my cubicle onto the way to his office.
Yeah.
I ended up in London working with traders, convincing them that I needed to take their machine for at least 35 minutes. The challenge being that for every 15 minutes they didn't have their machine, uh, they were losing £1 million sterling.
Yeah. Wow.
So, getting their attention became a real challenge. And I got this skill around short sound bites at a level that they could understand that got their attention.
Mm.
And it was just more out of practicality initially. But when I joined TEDx Melbourne, one of the gifts I was able to glean into was the data that you got from the TED Talks. I could tell when someone would pause, rewind, or abandon a video. And so I use statistical modeling to understand what gets someone's attention and keeps someone's attention. And that ended up getting the attention of the Professional Speakers Australia, the peak body for Australian speakers. And I ended up being national president there. So it was kind of like a step change rather than a kind of a giant leap,
Right.
uh, from a journey point of view.
Well, I mean, you talked about the practicalities of what you needed to do in terms of getting people's attention in a very short period of time. There must have been a degree of instinct involved in that though as well initially, right? When you're taking this foray into going from stuff that you know is important to getting other people to understand that what you know is important, right?
Yes.
So what do you think it was within your personality, do you think, or in your DNA that gave you that sort of instinctual ability to be able to hit the mark? Or did you find that you had to try a whole bunch of times and just fail a whole bunch of times?
I think it's more the latter. I'm an introvert. If you do any of those psychographic profiles, I'm a massive introvert. So part of it was out of practicality.
Mm.
Part of it was just building a little bit of thicker skin around being seen and heard.
Hmm.
And then in more recent times, I just thought, the school of hard knocks is nice, but you take a lot of bruises and body blows, right? So there must be a more efficient way to do it. And so the IT person in me did the analytical stuff. And
Right.
so when I resorted to the statistics, people started to pay attention there.
Mm.
And then when I was able to design, I guess, models for influence around that, that's where, a lot of traction came in and a lot of interest in the work I do. Because it moved beyond, your classic performing arts or your classic storytelling practices. And there's nothing wrong with those, but I think those poorly implemented still don't get you ahead.
Mm.
And I think it's a little bit overused in some instances. And
Mm.
so, what do we need to do? Well, why are we doing those things? And the reason we're doing those things is to build engagement, build rapport, build relationship. And
Mm.
if that becomes our goal, then those become supporting elements of which my content, I guess, is kind of the third leg of that stool that really gives it some predictability scale.
Interesting. We're talking about the science of an art or the art of a science. One way or the other, which is
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful, and that's one of the reasons why I rate you so highly is that you do bring a very IT head into a very artistic, you know,
Yeah.
flamboyant, personal, human, emotional world. But you,
Yeah.
but it's, but the great thing is, and you'll understand this as we go through the conversation, gang, is the human element is so not lost on him. And as he mentioned to, as he alluded to just then, very, very briefly, he said that some people can overuse it. So we'll unpack that as well. Now,
Sure.
before we crack on though, and I get way too nerdy on this stuff with you. I always ask all of our guests the standard question, which is what their definition of a high performance human is. I believe that there are four elements, being success, connection, influence, and happiness, and they all live in an ecosystem where one
Yeah,
can't survive without the other. What's
yeah.
your definition, John?
I think it's character, clarity, and definition, and definitive of purpose.
Say that a little bit slower for the people in the room.
Character,
Yeah,
clarity,
yeah.
and definitive of purpose. So, character is who do you need to be as a human being to carry the high performing capability?
Mm,
Clarity is really around direction. You know, you could be marching along and still be going the wrong direction potentially.
mm.
And the definitive purpose is really around having the real conviction and the fire in your belly to not give up. There's a bit of a stick-to-itness to it.
Yeah, nice. I like that. A lot of people talk about more upfront sort of immediate skills or assets or components to the DNA which defines a high performance human.
Yeah,
Um, but for your definition, more so relates a lot greater to the journey rather than the outcome, I
yeah,
think, which is
yeah.
interesting that. I like that. I like that a
And
lot. That's got a little bit of depth to it, which is good.
the other thing I would add is, and I borrowed this from James Clear, he says you don't rise to the level of your potential, you'll fall to the level of your systems.
Right.
And I love that because that once you have the character clarity and definitiveness, then it's like, well, what systems are you going to allow yourself to have that consistency and scale? And one of the things I noticed when it comes to speaking, communication, and influence is we have all sorts of systems for communication called sales and marketing and negotiation, but none around personal communication and none specifically around influence and engagement. And so
Mm.
that's where I decided to create a system.
I love that. And when we say system team, don't get it twisted. He's not just talking about spreadsheets and flowchart and things like that, right? He's talking about human-based systems as well, which are the mechanics of human dynamics and human conversation, human interactions, human connections. So
Mm,
we're not talking about zeros and ones with in programming in that respect. We're talking about generic archetype sort of construct systems based on human behaviors and patterns of behavior and so on and so forth. So don't
yes.
worry, we're not going to start telling you to download software
No,
anytime soon. All right.
no.
And no way, Pedro, no way. I really like that. So I want to dig into a couple of things just with regards to your background a little bit more first, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of the first things that I really want to dig into, which is one of the small points that you made, but it is probably one of the most pertinent points that prevents, say that three times fast, a lot of people from even attempting to have their message heard, right? Or even have the belief that their message is worth hearing, right? And that's the ability to have that thicker skin. Now, you've talked on God knows how many stages now, and it would be, duck to water stuff for yourself, and I'm sure you don't take any of them for granted, but at the same time, you understand the emotions, you understand the chemical reactions in yourself and whatnot, and how they work and how they contribute towards your success, all the rest of it. For a lot of people, the struggle and the fear of getting onto that first stage. For some people, it's being judged in public, right? We understand that.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, though, it is also about the fact that they don't feel that they are worth hearing, and they don't feel that they are worth listening to. Now, for yourself, when you had a very practical reason for being heard, which helped to drive you essentially in those early days. But since
Sure.
you've had a chance to really look back, analyze, and suss out what it is that can help us, get that sense of um, get that sense of ownership of our message and the fact that it's worth hearing. Can you talk to that a little bit around the certain things that you've found over your trip that have either been lacking in a lot of the people that you've been coaching, or that you found that's been the common missing pieces?
Yeah. Nerves is an interesting one. So again, you can kind of break it down in terms of whether your message should be heard or whether it's deserved to be heard. I think it helps to kind of really think about your message to begin with. I think if it's clear in your head, it can be clear in others' head. If it's
Mm,
not clear in your head, the others haven't got a chance. And so the way I like to define clarity is the ability to articulate your messages as a single compelling sentence.
mm,
It takes a lot of thinking. So from there, it gives you a foothold and I guess a foundation to go, all right, I know what I'm about. I know what I'm here for. Whereas if you don't and under pressure, what happens is people tend to waffle. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot.
mm,
People waffle all the time. And so that clarity gives you the certainty. Then when you have that certainty, you have a position.
mm,
And in any position, there's someone behind you and there's someone in front of you. Now, if you are looking at the people in front of you going, well, what's my message? Then yes, I think you are justified in saying, maybe I don't have this quite right.
mm.
But there's also equal number of people behind you. And then the question is, well, what value could you add there?
Yeah, okay.
And if you think about that as your market and your direction and the people you want to share your message with, it might be a small number of people, it might be a large number of people, but just see to what degree does that allow you to establish yourself as a thought leader or an expert in the domain you want to share. Now, I'm more than aware that I'm not the only speaker coach on the planet,
Mm,
but I can add value in terms of helping people say the right thing at the right time to the right person in the right way through both analytics and empathy in equal measure. And so
mm,
we then unpack that for the individual.
mm.
When people know themselves really well, it gives them the clarity and confidence to move forward on their message despite what their best instincts are telling them.
Mm.
And that's where you start to build a little bit of mental muscle and a bit of thicker skin, if you want to call that. Or if you decide that or you discover, sorry, that your message isn't as strong as it could be, then there's definitely a learning. And so either way, there's a win, no
Yeah,
matter how you feel about it. And so, this is why I say the definitive purpose, at some point, you have to back yourself.
mm.
And, otherwise you just wouldn't get up in the morning.
True,
And
true,
so
true, true.
it's all relative.
Yeah, I
And so,
agree. I agree. Would you argue that if you have got clarity and you are definitive in your purpose, it's almost like you don't need a thick skin because you are that centered in who you are
yes,
that
yes,
the thick skin is reserved for those who are trying to protect something that they're not overly sure about. Is that fair?
yeah. Yeah, you're 100%. You're 100%. If you're worried about something going wrong, the law of averages says that it's going to happen anyway,
Yeah,
right?
true.
So in which case, you've got to move forward regardless.
Mm.
Right?
It reminds me this, and this is not going to appeal to everyone. And for a lot of the audience, it really upset me, and it made me feel really, really old, right? When I asked a bunch of people in a room if they'd watched The Matrix, right? And when a load of them said no, I think a little part of me died inside. I think, I think I got a little bit upset. And
Yeah.
there's a part of it where you're talking about knowing yourself, and there's a part of it where the main character, he's in this thing of self-discovery, and he still doesn't know that he's the one, and all this sort of stuff. And there's a thing above the door of a kitchen, that the Oracle says. It says, and it's the Latin phrase for know thyself, right?
Mm.
And at the time, he looks at it and says to the Oracle, "Look, I'm not the one." And she said, and she returned, and she said, "You're still searching for something." And throughout the rest of the film, he has battles with himself. He has battles with the bad guys, Agent Smith and whatnot. And over time, he's facing adversity and he's copping bullets and he's taking hits. And it was almost as he's at his lowest ebb that he then finally discovers his true self, who he is, his definitive purpose,
Mm.
and he wakes up, he gets shots to bits, and then he wakes up and he sees the Matrix for what it is, i.e., he has a great degree of clarity. He has ultimate clarity in terms of what's in front of him, what's around him, and the things that he needs to be and do. So it's a great analogy for exactly what you just said.
Mm.
I was replaying the film in my head as you were saying it because it sounds exactly the same. But it's so true because once he realizes who he is, the bullets don't hit him. He doesn't have to dodge bullets. He just stops them, which means that he doesn't need that thick skin anymore because he has
Yeah.
absolute clarity in who he is.
Yeah. I think knowing yourself is, well, I mean, it's a journey, obviously, but I think it's one of the most valuable things you can do because when, again, it's clarity. You know where you end, where you know what you can do, you know what you're about, you know where you're going. It's easy to go, well, this is the right direction, or it's not the right direction.
Mm. And
Um,
also you know what you're not good at.
yeah,
And you know, and it's a lot easier then to be able to identify whether you need to go away and learn something or you need to go find someone that is good at stuff.
yeah,
And you collaborate and you become interdependent
yeah,
and
exactly.
life gets
Well,
great.
high performance can only be high performance when you know your progress. And you can only know
100%.
your progress when you know your baseline. And the baseline is you, where you're at.
100%. Ah, love that. I love that. There's your grab there, social media gang. That is your grab right there. That one, please note that one down. Um, very, very good. This is a wonderful start to this, and I'm sure, team, for anybody that's listening, you'll be taking plenty of notes. And there's a bit to unpack in what we just talked about there. But, um, John, just on that, when it came to the process, and we are forever learning about ourselves, so let's not get it twisted. There's no finite end to it. What work have you done over your trip to really help you discover your true self?
So there were things that I did by accident. There were things just out of hobbies, and there were things I did very deliberately.
Hmm.
So when you're young and you kind of don't know what you're doing and where you're going, I stumbled across martial arts, and that was incredibly valuable about knowing the mind body connection,
Mm,
what my physical capability was, um, knowing where you end and where the world begins, and knowing what you can achieve within that is really
mm,
important. There's a lot of esoteric things you could potentially talk about that which we won't go into that I'm 100% were fundamental to my high performance.
right.
Absolutely. Um, I did the Y2K thing for quite a while, did IT for quite a while. And like most people went, is this really where I want to go? Is this really what I wanted to do?
Mm,
And I was very fortunate to come across a couple of personal development courses that just kind of opened my eyes. Like I'm undervaluing myself and under achieving in terms of what my full potential was. So
hmm.
that was kind of the second phase. And then the third phase was literally, and this was a combination of all those years. I'd managed to save up a little bit and invest a little bit to then go, all right, I've got 6, 12 months what I want to do. And I literally basically did personal development courses for, on and off for about 2 years
Right.
and studied
And when
under
was
some
this? When was
incredible
this?
people. I'm going to say this was in the 2010, 2015 window,
Right. Okay.
somewhere around there. And following everyone, like I was kind of like doing every course of every thought leader at the time. So,
Mm,
you're in for your Tony Robbins and your Bob Proctors and your John D. Martinis and reading lots of books like Carlos Castaneda, like all the things that challenge the way I think about myself
mm.
and the way that I perceive the world and whether they actually are the realities, and then judging for myself whether that's appropriate for me to take on other people's views and systems and ideas or to find my own. And invariably, you find kind of a midpoint in there.
Were there any on that trip? Was there anything that surprised you or shocked you about yourself, either good or not so good?
Well, in the very first course I did, and I don't even know why I signed up, was a Tony Robbins course, which in hindsight just seems like the wackiest thing. I was so G'd up that someone said, "Oh, you're going to do a firewalk. I said, what firewalk? Like, I didn't even read I didn't even read what I was signing myself up to. And so to answer your questions, like the firewalk at the end was a pivotal moment that really clarified, what I was capable of and what I was willing to take myself through.
Mm,
Because I'm a hyper conservative person. I am like super conservative.
mm,
Like I would read and research this helps sometimes, but it's also detriment. I would overanalyze things to the point where I wouldn't actually get the thing done because I was too busy analyzing.
right.
Like I was always in my head. I was always not overcompensating. What's the overthinking
Yep.
what I was doing, and so that led to a very conservative outcome. And that was partly because of my upbringing,
Hmm.
but it was also partly who I became. And so, you know, to go from hyper conservative to firewalking was kind of like the biggest jump you could possibly imagine.
Right. Right.
And yeah,
And since then, have you found, I mean, overthinking, that's one of my Achilles heels, not gonna lie. I overthink the crap out of stuff. And there'll be people that are listening to this that are giggling, going, "Yes, you fucking will do." But for you, John, have you got some sort of framework now that allows you to become aware of when you are crossing that line or approaching that line of overthinking?
I think there's two sides to that. This is where the clarity in the baselining is really important.
Hmm.
Because if you're clear, it becomes pretty evident pretty quickly that you're overdoing it.
Yeah.
At the same time, a human, and it's quite easy to forget, which
Mm.
is why the baseline is the other part to that, which
Yeah.
is okay, where do you need to go? Are you actually hitting it? And let's be functional, practical, and realistic
Mm.
about whether the stretch goal was actually achieved from the first place, or even more important, are you actually hitting the goals in the first place? Because I would argue that most times, most people don't hit the goals that count.
Fair.
They, they hit the goals that are interesting or got their attention.
Yeah, fair. Absolutely fair. Absolutely. I ironically, I put a little post up about that this morning, about how we can make ourselves feel busy by, claiming that we're trying to achieve this greater good and greater goal and all that sort of jazz when the shit's got to get done at some point. You got to
Yeah.
actually get the stuff done that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we all
That
fall
does
for that.
mean doing the stuff that's not fun and
Yeah,
mundane and
yeah,
painful and maybe repetitive. But, if that gets the job ultimately done, then you either find another way to do it or you stick to it.
100%. Now, I want to dig into this being heard versus being valued.
Yes.
And I want to talk about, I want you to unpack this a little bit for us, John, because I am confident that a heck of a lot of people that are listening to this podcast would have had their ears pricked up tremendously.
Mm.
Because for a lot of business owners, people that want to become thought leaders, however many million coaches there are in the world now, everybody's trying to be valued, which then ends up in transactions. But most people
Yeah.
end up only being heard, which ends up with a lot of them being broke.
Yeah.
So unpack this for us. What are in your worldly experience, having done this for over 2 decades? And team, if you're watching the video of this, you'll be surprised with me saying that because he definitely doesn't look like he's been doing it for 2 decades. Right? I'd say that for him for nothing. What are the key elements to this then? How do we even approach this? How do we analyze this? Go from the start and help us
Yeah.
out here.
Well, I mean, again, I like to use analytics and data, but like, I think was it Newton that said an object in motion tends to stay in motion?
Hmm.
And so a lot of people just don't have enough motion. They don't have enough momentum. And I'm a
Okay.
big fan of momentum. Momentum gives you direction
Hmm.
and it gives you support. Doing everything from a standing start is hard work. So this is why the clarity becomes really important because once you start, you've got to commit.
Yes.
And then once you commit, you got the momentum. Once you got the momentum, you got the outcome. Well, you'll reach your outcome, but so that in terms of being heard and known for being recognized for what you're doing, is what are the minimum things you need to do to baseline where, the known element. So if I sit on my butt and expect the entire world to come and buy my products and services, I'm living in a dream world.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a point where I need to get out. There is a point where I need to market. There is a point where I need to position myself. And that's your baseline. But that's what everyone else is doing. Now, some people's solution, and I'm just going to choose a marketing angle because that's got a lot of processes, well-known processes underneath it,
Mm-hmm.
would be things like sales and your marketing and just being consistent with your message. A lot of people think when I get there, then I'll be recognized, but there's no distinction in that. And so some people are going, well, just say more often. And I kind of resist that a little bit. I'd rather add, when you add to the conversation, you're adding value to the conversation. Otherwise, you just signal to noise is too low. You sound like everyone else.
Mm.
The other solution that often gets thrown out there is, find your unique angle or sensationalize something. And yes, it gets someone's attention, but it doesn't necessarily keep someone's attention if you're not adding value after you get their attention.
True.
So then the question is, value then becomes the sustained ability to empower other people to achieve their potential.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
And when I think it was Zig Ziglar who says, if you want to get what you want, help people get what they want. So it's a reciprocal relationship, not a transactional one.
Yeah, I like it.
And when we're in that mindset, when we have an attitude of reciprocity, which again, Newton says every action has an equal and opposite reaction, then by definition, if you're adding value, you can't do anything but receive value.
Mm.
And so it's about building momentum there. And this is why I love aligning all my systems and models to laws of physics or natural systems, because invariably the wisdom is there,
Yes.
you know? And if your systems don't align with a natural system, then there's one of two things happening. You're making something up completely new that no one's ever thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a possibility, but the probability that's really small. And then if you're going to maintain it, it's going to take a lot of work because it's so unique.
Mm.
Or you'll push against a system that you shouldn't be. So if I say gravity as a natural law, for example, it can be your friend or it can be your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
When you're at the top of a ladder, gravity is not necessarily a great thing. When you've got a parachute and you're looking for a bit of a thrill, gravity is your friend.
Mm-hmm.
So work with the law, not against the law. And I would argue that anyone who's being fatigued or running out of energy has a high probability that they're resisting a natural system or a natural law. And so when it comes to high performance, I guess what we're doing is working out where are your points of friction, working out where the one thing that's adding the most amount of friction, and start with that. So you're singularly focused on the thing that's slowing you down the most, and then you go to the next thing. But what often happens is people try and do everything all at once.
Mm.
And that is then confusing to judge cause and effect. And it also ties you on multiple fronts rather than being definitive and successful on a single front.
Spread you too thin.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I think one of the early lessons everybody, I mean, you'll be scribbling down notes. Your pens will be going smoking, I reckon. But I think that one of the key things that I'm hearing with that is one of the most common mistakes is, and I think it's a mistake that's been born out of listening to a lot of the key influential characters that are out there in social media land and whatnot, where they're talking about just post content, 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 content. And I think that a lot of us, me included, I'm thinking about my own performance here a little bit as well. I think what a lot of us have done is we've been so focused on being present with our content that it's created, as we mentioned before, it's created a level of white noise that falls on deaf ears now because it is so prevalent across so many people, across so many platforms.
Yeah.
So if we are to try and create this equilibrium between being heard, because I don't think, and again, I've fallen foul the other way as well, where I've tried to bring so much value that I've ended up bringing value to a point where it's almost been taken advantage of. And I think there is such a thing as bringing too much value as well, because then you end
Mm.
up devaluing yourself. I believe. I believe.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, so, and I've gone that way, and I've gone the other way. So this equilibrium of being heard plus being valued, I think, is really quite critical. Finding that
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
Now, what are the sort of things, if we can get practical for a second, John? What are the sorts
Sure.
of things that can help people out there to bring value if they haven't got if they haven't got the stages already, so they're not getting booked for speaking gigs, or they're not getting coaching gigs, or they're not getting client, they're not getting the customers as much as they'd like, so they haven't got the actual physical platforms to be able to bring value. How can they bring value to a greater community that actually gets attention paid to it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's a few elements in there. When they're speaking, there's two parts to the equation, speaking and listening.
Hmm.
Now, I mentioned the sensationalism and sending out more messages. That's just speaking. That's kind of like the equivalent of going to the top of the tallest building, yelling out on a megaphone. So it doesn't necessarily mean people hear that, right? So then the question is, well, how do you get people to receive
Yeah.
what you're saying, right?
Hmm.
And so they need to be open to that. And so there's two parts to that. There's your craft and your ability to articulate clearly and with, I guess, resonance
Hmm.
to what they're looking for, which by definition means you need to study the listener and meet their needs and expectations before having a priority of I need to say certain things.
Hmm.
And so Sun Tzu says in the art of war, study your enemy, know your enemy more than they know themselves, and you will want to pity them more than conquer them. And
Yeah.
so it's really around how do you know your listener so intimately and so well that when you share your story, they relate to it so strongly that there is prick up and there's a common ground or a common sense that this person can help you. And so it's not opening their ears, it's opening their minds
Mm.
to how they relate and resonate to your message. And so the ability to say the right thing, the right time, the right person, the right way is the art of getting someone's attention and keeping someone's attention, but also inversely creating something that relates and resonates with them in a meaningful and human way. And it's the humans that connect in the interaction
Mm.
that will always have longevity beyond the systems and processes that you put in place, although you still need them. And so then you are talking about trust, empathy, rapport, as opposed to knowledge and insight, because you can Google knowledge and insight,
You can.
you know? But to create the resonance, to create the meaning for someone, that you have something to offer, even if you can't see them, like in this example, we're in a podcast, needs to be, I need to be less attached to, what I want to say and more about, well, what is high performance? What are people looking for? How would they baseline that? How
Mm.
would they understand that? How do they currently think about it? What other options could they have? What advice or insight or knowledge or learnings could I potentially add to the conversation that may help in that journey? And then, therefore, what could I potentially say that could fill those gaps?
If we're to sum it up in a sentence, could you say, sorry, not argue, could you say that the difference between being heard and being valued is based upon whether you use your language or the audience's language. So it's the language that you use that determines whether you are being heard or whether you're being valued.
Yes. And I would use language in the broadest possible sense. It's the words, it's the sensibility, it's their mindset, you know. When
The
someone says, "Oh, you're
tension.
speaking my language," we're resonating, right? We're vibing.
Yeah,
That's so you're 100%. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
that's and I've said this on a couple of occasions maybe and quoted my mentor Rick Rushton, who has quoted Jim Rohn. And
Mm.
it's around seeking to, not Jim Rohn, sorry, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Covey. Seek
Yep.
to understand before being understood.
Yeah.
Rick calls it tune in before you broadcast. And
Yeah. Nice.
and I really, really think that what you've done is that you've just gone and broken down why, which I think a lot of people struggle to understand properly. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that that's where I'm missing because a number of people will have heard that seek to understand. But two things. One, they perhaps don't know how to understand the audience or who they're communicating to properly. Another point would be that their ego is so self-involved, or they think that their message is that great that people should just take it in and just accept it for what it is, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you will have seen God knows how many of them.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say in terms of being able to just drop the ego for a second to be able to realize the importance of understanding the other person, the other side of the equation from a language point of view? What do you think have been the major hurdles for a lot of people when it comes to because you do, it's a case of becoming vulnerable to understanding, right, I've got my message, I'm sure of my message, I've got clarity, I'm definitely well defined,
Yeah.
but that ain't going to get me there. How
Yeah.
how how have you found people have really struggled with that? Or what are the elements, what are the things, the little barriers to entry?
I think the most obvious ones are very, yeah, you don't see them because you're already there, but I would call them arrogance and ego.
Mm,
The need to share your message, the need to tell someone something, as
mm,
opposed to the opportunity to share and the opportunity to relate an idea
mm,
to someone. I think the first part of that. And then finding the right role or structure or offering that best meets that need. So some people like to read it in a book, some people like to hear it through a speaker, some people like to do it on a course. Find a mechanism by which your message is both valuable and accessible.
mm,
And it's the accessibility part that I think, of which speaking is one of the options, obviously. It is one of the mechanisms by which you can communicate your message. It'll come out of my mouth eventually.
mm.
Um, so, get clarity, get your baseline, find a position and direction, which is all physics, and then find a platform or a mechanism by which you deliver it.
Love it. I love it. I mean, and to quote a guy that you've been focused on for a little bit, simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication, and you've just made it sound real simple, realistically, and it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that, to be brutally honest. I wanted to just do a quick 90-degree shift before I let you crack on because this has been such an amazing, fruitful, uh, lovely. I hate to sound so simple, but it's such a lovely conversation. Um, I wanted to quickly pick your brain about the art of storytelling. Now,
Mhm.
this is a little bit on the selfish side. I know
Yeah,
that for a lot of people that are in public speaking, they've got a really good message to say, but one of the keys to being able to put it into the language of the consumer is through the art of storytelling, right?
yeah.
What would you say your top sort of handful, your top sort of three or so bits of advice when it comes to being able to articulate your message in the form of a story?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things to be mindful of with stories. There's a difference between the mechanics of the story and its storytelling and the reason why you're doing the story.
Right.
And a lot of people get attached to the mechanics. I've got to say this at a certain time, or I've got to build up to this. beginning, middle, and end, and hero's journey, all this stuff. Yeah, you need that. You need that. But that's not the reason why you're connecting. You connect and create meaningful exchange, meaningful moments. So story is really powerful. And the reason story is so powerful from a biological point of view is for about, we've only been reading and writing as a species for about 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Previous to that, everything was story. So
Yeah.
story is incredibly powerful and valuable, but there's lots of stories, and we need to create a way that relates and resonates with someone.
Mm.
So when we're thinking about story, I think if you can again, it comes back to simplicity and clarity. But what's the meaning making you need to create? I said, saying the right thing, the right time to the right person, the right way is a function of story.
Mm.
Story also needs to move beyond the content, but it needs to meet the moment. In other words, is the person open to receive or closed to receive or too busy to receive or maybe not a priority to receive? So there's context.
Mm.
And then there's the intent, which is what's the trust required in order for them to sort of mentally open their minds. So there are three elements of story that I think often get lost in because we're thinking about the mechanics of the story.
Mm.
And then in there, how do we build that rapport? And that's why I built this little intention architecture. How do we build the trust and rapport without saying, trust me?
Yes.
And so, you know, in that, there is, what do you, in your heart of heart, believes you genuinely feel is going to connect and resonate with that person? And how can you relate to that idea? And how can you use the mechanics of story to do that?
Mm.
Rather than I'm going to learn the mechanics of story and say it and hope they understand it.
Yes. Yep. 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 Yep.
And that's the key to storytelling is the moment making we create.
Mm.
There's a lot of reasons, both mechanical and biologically, why that I feel is more efficient and more effective.
Mm.
Because you can adjust your message in real time.
100%.
Because you're focused on them receiving the message rather than you getting your mechanics right.
100%. Reverse engineering from the moment that you want to create.
Yeah.
Love
And
it.
you step backwards. So I've almost forgotten the original question around storytelling. Can you just remind me, just so I double
The
check
three,
that?
like, just the key things that allow people to understand how the art of storytelling when it comes to broadcasting their message.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we pretty much covered the main
I think,
guts.
no, I think you've hit the nail on the head, my man.
Yeah.
I think you've because in gang, if you're not watching this, if you're just listening to this, as I was watching John, you could tell that this is his world because he closed his eyes as he was talking to me at one point then, and you could tell that it was coming from such a depth of understanding that his body language sort of was sort of telling a story in the sense of it's such a fundamental to the art of public speaking that it has to get he had to articulate it as well as he possibly could because of how important a message it is. Being able to reverse engineer from the moment that you want to create, and I think before that, being able to define the effective moment that you wish to create that's going to allow people to pop the lids of the jar of their mind in order to take in the message that you want to deliver. That, I think, is the banner ad for this whole conversation, because that's, if you can do that, team, then you're away at the races.
It's where the clarity comes back to clarity again. You know what the end point is.
100%.
There's one last story very quickly. I listened to a recording called "The Strangest Secret" by Earl Nightingale, and he gives this example where he says, if you took a ship without a captain and just pushed it out into the ocean, it'll end up anywhere. But
Mm,
if you know the port you're going to, and with an experienced captain, you can take a ship anywhere. And so it's that clarity and direction that allows you to get to your endpoint. And I think the main reason a lot of people stumble along the way is not because it's hard, although sometimes it is, but it's because the clarity they have and the definitive drive, which comes back to the original
Mm.
conversation question, are critical factors.
What a way to bookend and bring this thing to a full circle. Like John, I could talk to you for hours, man. You are literally one of the most articulate, thoughtful, uh, deep conversational people that I've had the fortune of meeting, and I feel very, very privileged to be connected to you, man. I really, really do, and I say that genuinely. One last question though that we always ask everybody, which
Sure.
is, because you're as we both agreed, it's an ever evolving process, this journey for high performance within ourselves, and I'm sure you're striving along on your own journey yourself. What is the one thing that you feel that you need to work on the most right now for you when it pertains to where you want to head to next?
Yeah. Well, it's still the thing I always do, the ability to speak, communicate, and influence better. And the reason for that is you could be the best in the world, but if you can't articulate it, how do you expect other people to know your value?
Mm. And when you've got 8 billion people on the planet, team, we're never going to be short of test subjects, are we?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're never going to be short. John, can't thank you enough for your time, man. I really can't. I know that I personally, I'm going to be listening to this over and over again because so much value packed into such a short amount of time. So your generosity is definitely not lost on me, and I'm sure it's absolutely valued by so many people that are going to be listening to this. So thank you so much. We'll make sure, team, that I put links to John's LinkedIn at the very, very least, and a lot of the stuff that he does online as well, a lot of his speaking coaching and whatnot. I'll make sure they'll put that in the show notes too, so that you can follow this guy because he just drops wisdom on a regular basis. So I highly encourage that if you feel that you have a message to broadcast, even if you're not that sure that public speaking is for you, just remember what John said. Public speaking might not be the vehicle that you need in order to get your message out there, but you still need to get your message out there, which is what this guy can help you with. Of that, there is no doubt. John,
Well,
thank you.
almost all my work is not it's not public speaking. It's actually helping leaders connect, engage, and influence the people around them in order to achieve whatever their desires are, their objectives are.
And that's
So,
why you need to follow this guy big time. You need to connect with him. So, John, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate you being with us on the High Performance Human podcast team. Oh, I think I need to go and have a lie down and then re-listen to this bloody thing. And I'm sure you guys do too. Make sure you've got lots and lots of notes from this. And if you haven't, you need to definitely need to go and re-listen to it again because there is so much value within that. Whether it is you broadcasting a message professionally, or it might just be broadcasting something personally that you want to create deeper connections with a loved one or something like that. There's nuggets in there that's going to help you in any facet of your life. So make sure that you go and re-listen. But until next time, team, thank you so much for your time and attention. Really, really appreciate it. If you have got any questions, please feel free to connect with us, andy@andyreid.com.au, or shoot me a message on DM via Instagram or LinkedIn. Until next time, my friends, stay safe, healthy, happy, look after yourselves and each other, and we'll see you again next time.